With a $200 million original production budget and an additional 6 weeks of reshoots, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Studios is finally out. And it had a tremendous first weekend, to be sure. But there's a lot of things that we need to cover about what this movie cost, what this movie is going to need to do at the box office to break even, and some other key points that might make this past weekend's number not seem as great as it might on the surface. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back, folks. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade, and it's good to see everybody out there, as always. And if you are like one of the many folks that are not yet subscribed to this channel, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy the content that you're getting, and do leave a comment before you head out the door today after you go ahead and share it out as well. That's always a big help. YouTube loves the share. So let's get into some of the numbers on this film. Now, before that, I guess I should say I have not had an opportunity to see this film yet. This is not a film review. We do want to look at the actual performance of this because the numbers can be a little deceiving, especially in the last few years as ticket prices have wildly inflated. And in fact, as I was looking at some of the recent data today, they have inflated even more than I initially had anticipated when I did my last video on The Batman when that came out, comparing that to previous iterations of that superhero franchise. But when it comes to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, this by any stretch had a very, very good opening weekend, hauling in 187 million plus in North American ticket sales and another $261 million in international ticket sales for a total of almost $449 million in its opening weekend. That is a great, great start, no matter how you slice the numbers. Can't take that away from them. They had a great start. And of course, a lot of this, as was expected, is probably due from a spillover of goodwill from Spider-Man No Way Home, which has rounded out its box office run at a little shy of $1.9 billion. And by the way, who was that guy out there that said after Spider-Man's opening weekend that he thought that movie would crack $2 billion at the end of its box office run? Oh, that was me. Now, of course, China never came into play as China did not allow Spider-Man No Way Home into the country, as we recently found out because the studio refused to remove the Statue of Liberty from the final scenes. This is one of these quirky things that the Chinese censors don't like. Any symbol of liberty, freedom, anything like that, any pro-Americana stuff. Yeah, China. But needless to say, a lot of that audience goodwill did make it over to Doctor Strange, as I expected that it probably would. The question becomes is after this first weekend, how well will that audience hang on? You see, Spider-Man No Way Home had the advantage of having very, very solid, positive audience reactions to the film, almost across the board. Even the most ardent critics of superhero movies tended overwhelmingly to really enjoy the film, have a good time, thought it was a good story. The acting was great, everything fit together. People thought it was the best of the 3 Tom Holland Spider-Man films. That carried the film to a load of repeat viewings and driving audiences like mad into the theaters. Sony also doesn't have its own streaming service. It didn't pre-announce when the film would drop on a streaming service down the road. This compelled audiences to go see it up front in the theater. Disney finally got their act together, something that I've been lamenting about them and a lot of other studios, to be fair, for some time, at least all the way through 2021, when the mantra was to have these films pre-announced with a 45-day or limited window of release and then immediately drop on a proprietary streaming service after a shortened theater run. This had a lot of people sitting at home waiting for it to drop. They did not pre-announce an exclusive 45-day window for Doctor Strange, so I think that's going to help it continue at the box office. But how far from here is it going to go? For that, we're going to look back at the first Doctor Strange movie in 2016 and Spider-Man No Way Home from just a few months ago. The original Doctor Strange film had a domestic open of about $85 million or so, and it had a total worldwide box office complete run of about $676 million in cum. Pretty good run for a character that was a relatively unknown in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but really did gain popularity as time went on. This movie legged out from its opening weekend with about 2.74x, meaning that based on the opening weekend, the movie then went 2.74 times its opening weekend by the completion of its run to where we got what we got in its domestic cum, which was a total of $232 million, roughly. Spider-Man No Way Home had a better set of legs on it, a leg set of 3.09. That's a very envious leg out for any kind of film. It doesn't matter what it is. Very few films tend to breach that 3.0 mark. Usually films that have very good word of mouth, high audience interest, keeps people going back. That word of mouth brings in new viewers, brings in repeat viewers. That's what you want to see. The problem is that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness does not seem to be enjoying anywhere near the level of universal audience support that Spider-Man No Way Home is. Yes, there is a heavily front-loaded box on this movie because of the anticipation, especially after Spider-Man No Way Home, thinking that this was going to tie in more heavily to that film, perhaps an appearance from the web-slinger himself. All of that played into a factor on how this movie opened up. The question becomes, how will it go from here? Spider-Man also enjoyed a Christmas week release, meaning that even though it had a 67% drop from the first to the second weekend, Spider-Man No Way Home enjoyed an audience in the US, in Canada, and most of the places of the world where kids were out of school, parents were finishing up work for the holiday season. There was a lot more time off that week. Doctor Strange is not going to enjoy that advantage. However, that should portend or at least suggest that the second weekend drop-off for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, you would think, should be significantly less than Spider-Man No Way Home. Meaning if Spider-Man No Way Home had a second weekend drop-off of 67% after a healthy weekday run because of the holiday season, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, probably what Disney and Marvel is thinking, they'd like to see something more along the lines of a 50 to 55% drop-off. I think if Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness exceeds a 60% drop-off, that's probably going to signal a problem. I don't think that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is going to quite leg out like Spider-Man did at 3.09, but I think it's going to leg out a little bit better than the first Doctor Strange movie that came in at 2.74. Let's split the difference and call it 2.9, and let's figure out where this movie is probably going to wind up at the end of its run. If Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness plays out at a 2.9 set of legs, that's going to put the final box office tally somewhere right around $1.3 billion. Now, that's a great run for any film, and that's certainly something that should cover all of the costs. And let's talk about those. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness started out with a $200 million production budget. That's fairly standard fare these days for a Marvel Cinematic Universe character film. Usually the big ensemble films, like when we had Avengers or Infinity War, especially Endgame, those budgets went way north of that, $250, $300, $400 million reportedly for Endgame. This kind of film at $200 million is a lot of money to be sure, but it's something that's pretty commonplace for a Marvel film like this. The other problem, however, is that figure likely does not include 6 weeks of reshoots that they did around Thanksgiving of 2021. That is a lot of reshoots. You can shoot almost entire films in a 6-week period. Maybe not big CGI pieces, but certainly things like rom-coms or basic dramas. That is a load of reshoots, and I don't think that that's factored into that $200 million. So that's probably added a significant amount of cost on top of that. Not to mention, everybody always tends to forget about global P&A, that's prints and advertising, or in other parlance, global marketing. Now, a lot of times in history, we looked at things like global marketing and we could say that, well, you take your production budget and you figure 50% over again is what they would spend on marketing. The only issue with that is that marketing costs have increased dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years, and that rule of thumb really no longer applies. I made a video a while back talking about The Nun from James Wan, part of the Conjuring series. That movie came out in 2018 with a roughly $22 million production budget. But the studio spent another $90 million almost in global marketing. Now, that movie came in with an almost $400 million global haul, so that was an investment that was well worth it. But it goes to show that the old rule of thumb really doesn't work. Let's look at Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home had a $200 million production budget, reportedly, the same as Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But Sony reportedly spent another $242 million by expert industry estimates on global marketing on top of the $200 million production budget, for a total all-in cost of Sony Pictures to the tune of $442 million. Now, it would not surprise me at all if Marvel Studios and Walt Disney Distributors spent a similar amount on this movie, although I don't think they spent quite as much. I think they probably spent somewhere in the $150 to $200 million range on this film. This is a huge film that Disney and Marvel really needed to take off, especially after the relative failures of the Eternals and Shang-Chi to really ignite audiences. Those did not get the kind of reception that Disney had hoped for, even though they had some degree of bragging rights on Shang-Chi for having a month in theaters all to itself. So that being said, the all-in cost for the Walt Disney Company and Marvel Studios on this film is probably somewhere in the range, easily, of $400 million, meaning it really needs about $750 to $800 million at the box office before it can comfortably get into profit territory. That is a tall ladder to climb, but I think it is one that is definitely going to happen with this film. In order for this film not to make that mark, it would literally have to perform under a 2.0 set of legs. I highly doubt that will happen. I think the bare minimum for this film is a set of legs that is at about 2.5, more likely 2.75, and I think as high as 2.9. So either way you slice it, this movie is going to get into profit territory, but it goes to show just how expensive these films are, what kind of financial endeavor and risk that these things have inherently. But there's one final thing that we need to look at, and this was something to me that was frankly stunning. From today on Monday, May 9th, as I'm recording this, from Yahoo Finance, a website that I spend most of my day on in my professional life, this article came up. How Doctor Strange's success will prep theaters for, quote, the biggest test we've seen yet. And certainly the CEO and president of IMAX has been very pleased with the opening, as more audiences go to large format specialty theaters to see this. But that comes with a cost, and that is much higher ticket prices. We talked in previous videos about The Batman, seeing that the average ticket price there, I was assuming based on data that came from the financial reports from the publicly traded company of Cinemark, which owns Cinemark and Regal Theaters, that they had seen a 20% average ticket price jump from the previous year. That's tremendous. And then you tack on to that The Batman heralded the initiation of variable ticket pricing from companies like AMC. Now, Cinemark had reported they had experimented with this for a couple of years before, but this is driving ticket prices higher and higher and higher, and I could not believe what Entelligence, the marketing data amalgamator and research firm, came up with for Doctor Strange. According to box office analytics platform Entelligence, 13.5 million moviegoers were estimated to have seen the film Doctor Strange over the weekend, representing the second most attended film since the pandemic started. Spider-Man No Way Home took the top spot with 20.6 million patrons. This is the kind of start to the summer that the movie industry was really hoping for, and it really sets the pace for the next few months with a pretty strong slate. That's something that we haven't seen in 3 years, said Sean Robbins, chief analyst at Box Office Pro. The average ticket price sold for $12.99. Full stop. Holy crap. The average ticket price for this new Doctor Strange movie, according to data analytics firm Entelligence, came in, let's just call it, $13 a ticket. How does that compare to the previous Doctor Strange film that had a roughly $85 million opening weekend in North America? Well, according to the National Association of Theater Owners, who tracks actual ticket prices that do not simply use the CPI or the Consumer Price Index to adjust for inflation, because as we have learned, the CPI is a bogus number when it comes to inflating ticket prices. Ticket prices, like college education and healthcare, inflates at a far faster pace, bar none. In 2016, when the first Doctor Strange movie came out, according to NATO, the average ticket price in the United States was $8.65. That means that since the first Doctor Strange movie released just 6 years ago, the average ticket price has gone up 50%, 50%, 1.5 times from what it was 6 years ago. That is insane. And it goes to put into perspective how well or how not as well as you might think that some of these films right now, particularly the big headline mega blockbuster stuff like the Doctor Stranges or Batman that just recently came out, are not doing quite as well as they appear. Certainly dollars are dollars, and they need to pay back production and marketing costs, which with those two movies they were able to do. But in terms of historical comparative relevance, they're not what you think. It looks like this new Doctor Strange movie blew the doors off the first one by over $100 million in its opening weekend. But if we actually were to adjust 2016's Doctor Strange to current $13 average per ticket prices, well, that would put the first Doctor Strange's movie, their opening weekend would have been about 125 to 130 million. Certainly the new film still beats it, but not by near as much. So this just goes to show that actual numbers, math, and real data is important, and I promise you, these are things that companies like Walt Disney, Marvel, Warner Brothers, all these folks are looking at. It's not just about the dollars they haul in, it's about the size of the audience that they're actually getting compared to the relative ticket price. That is huge, because if audiences continue to shrink and just pay higher and higher ticket prices, that means that ancillary sales are going to also diminish. And this is where a lot of these types of movies really make their jack. What is that? Merchandising, toys, action figures, Halloween costumes, lunchboxes, everything that kids and people buy related to these films. If the audience shrinks, it's not helping. Okay? And that is exactly what these companies are looking at. So be on the watch for this, because even though they seemingly make more money, and in some cases they really are now, if that audience does not continue to grow or retracts, that's going to be a big problem for Hollywood. And this is something I promise you that studios like Marvel are very cognizant of, regardless of how much hoopla and hype they throw out into the mainstream medium. Let me know what you think on all this. Make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and do, of course, leave a comment before you head out the door today. It's good to see everybody again. Hope to see you again next time. And until then, take care.